Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Alice Dolan. I sit on the NAPCAN Youth Speak Out Council, and I'm very excited to be hosting this webinar. Thank you for coming to join us all, everyone. So we'll just perhaps give it a minute and wait and see, let everyone trickle in, but we'll get started pretty soon. All right, I'll just give it a second, let all the instructions from the GoToWebinar platform finish, and then perhaps I'll get started now. So thank you for joining us all today. Very excited to be hosting this webinar here on the topic of the TV show Adolescence. We have such a great lineup today, so I think it's going to be a really great panel that we have today. So I'd just like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands that we're all joining from today. I'm here on the lovely, sort of partially sunny, partially rainy lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. And I'd just like to keep in mind that a lot of our conversations today will be about the internet, which is a pretty recent phenomenon for every culture in the world to be dealing with. But I think what we'll see in our discussions today is that ultimately what we're talking about comes down to just children needing adults to provide safety and love. And so I want to acknowledge the countless millennia of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities really championing their young people, providing that culture and connection and community on these lands that we're all on. And so I pay my respects to elders past and present, and particularly to the First Nations children who will carry on these cultures into this new internet-filled world. And I particularly pay my respects to any mob joining us here today. So a few housekeeping items to start. So all the webinars this week as part of our National Child Protection Week series, they will be recorded and posted on our website in the coming weeks. We do have the chat function available where you can ask questions, so please feel free to submit questions throughout this webinar. We'll try to get to as many of the questions as possible in the Q&A session at the end. The chat function, you can find that at the top of your screen. The webinar is in listen-only mode, so everyone in the audience is muted and your camera is off, so it's only our panelists that you'll see up on the screen. If you need, closed captions are available, and you can enable those by clicking the CC icon on the bottom right of your screen. If you experience any issues, please refer to the frequently asked questions posted in the chat, or you can contact the phone number or email address provided in the chat. So this year, as part of National Child Protection Week, we're continuing to champion the message that every conversation matters. But building on this, the campaign also highlights the importance of shifting conversation to action. Because we heard from a lot of young people that it's great to have all these conversations, but it doesn't mean anything if you don't do anything about it. And so we have to recognize that dialogue is just the first step, but meaningful change that comes when those conversations lead to actual actions that cause safer, more supported lives for every child now and into the future. So in terms of what we're talking about today, we're talking about Adolescence. So earlier this year, Netflix released its 4-part series, Adolescence. This is a drama about a 13-year-old boy who's been accused of murdering his classmate. And throughout the show, we follow the detectives and the psychologists as they interview the boy and his parents and his classmates, and they try to piece together what happened and what his possible motives are. And as all this unfolds, we start to get glimpses into this world of online misogyny that all these children are being exposed to. And so this show received extensive praise after its release. It had a 98% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and the Prime Ministers of Australia and the UK have both backed the idea of showing it in schools. But then on the flip side, after finishing the show, I was a bit curious kind of what the reception was. I went and I had a look on Reddit to see what people were saying there. And it was interesting, a lot of people were really scathing about the show. They were saying it's just, pearl-clutching moral panic. It doesn't provide any clear answers. It's blaming parents. It's conflating all these different online communities as simply being identical. And it really falls short of what it's trying to do. So it's interesting to see that there's these different perspectives, and it is quite a divisive show. So today what we want to do is we want to unpack this show, we want to explore what it got right and what's still missing from the conversation. And then we want to focus on what everyone can do to help ensure the best outcomes for our young people. So a bit of a content warning. So today's discussion will obviously focus on issues of misogyny, gender-based violence, and technology-facilitated abuse. And additionally, we may also venture into topics such as mental health and suicide, bullying, racism, homophobia and queerphobia, and body image. So there are some heavy conversations that will be had today, and this might be distressing for some people. So please take care of your well-being, step away if you need to, and reach out for support if you need. So if you find yourself needing immediate support or someone to talk to, there are some phone support numbers that are provided in the chat. And NAPCAN also has some staff behind the scenes who are readily available to support you. Additionally, if you have a young person in the room with you who might not be ready for some of these discussions, now might be a good time to pop some headphones in. So with all that being said, thank you so much for joining us here today, or in the future if you're watching this recording. And it's time to introduce our panelists. So I'll ask each person to turn the camera and pop up on the screen as I introduce them. So firstly, I'd like to introduce Heather Jackson, who's the Director of Interventions and Innovation at the Department of Communities and Justice. So Heather has been involved in countering violent extremism since 2016 for various agencies, with a focus on client reintegration into the community and violent extremism disengagement. Heather leads 3 countering violent extremism programs with specialist staff both in New South Wales and nationally, and these provide support and structured case management to people who are vulnerable to violent extremism. And particularly youth vulnerability and susceptibility is an area of ongoing research. So thanks for joining us here today, Heather. We also have Dr. Simon, Heather? We also have Dr. Simon Copland, a researcher at Australian National University whose research focuses on violent extremism, misogynist groups online, and white supremacy. And he's also a recently published author with his recent book, The Male Complaint, The Manosphere and Online Misogyny. So thanks for joining us too today, Simon. We also have Daniel Paproth, who's the communications manager at the Man Cave, as well as a former lead facilitator of their programs. So over the past 7 years, he's worked directly with thousands of teenage boys in classrooms across Australia, and now he focuses on translating the insights from those programs into stories that the wider world can engage with, building a bridge between an often misunderstood and maligned demographic, which is young men, and the communities and systems around them. And finally, we have Matt Tyler, who's the Executive Director at the Men's Project at Jesuit Social Services. Over the last 6 years, he's worked with a team committed to reducing violence, preventing child sexual abuse, and promoting flourishing amongst men and boys themselves. This has included leading research on the Man Box project, which is a fantastic piece of research they've put together, as well as translating that into practice as one part preventing men's violence. And he has also worked on the development of Australia's first helpline, Stop It Now, to prevent child sexual abuse by engaging those who are at risk of offending, and overseeing a range of programs to prevent violence and abuse, working with adolescents who have often experienced harms and supporting them to flourish. So thanks for joining us too today, Matt. Thanks, so Alex. It's such an incredible panel that we've got here today, such an amazing lineup. I'm so excited to learn from all these wonderful voices, and yeah, I think we're going to have a really great discussion. So our conversation today, we're going to first just kind of set the scene, have a look at what online misogyny looks like in the world today. Then we'll go and start exploring the impacts it has on young people, and then finally we'll talk about what actions everyone can take. So to kick us off, I'd like to throw it to Daniel and ask, from your experience, what do relationships look like for young people today, and how are those different from young relationships from previous generations?
Thanks very much for having me, Alice. Hello, everyone. I work at the Man Cave, so we're a preventative mental health, emotional literacy, character development charity for teenage boys and their communities. Really excited for this discussion. So in our context, we work predominantly with teenage boys in high schools. We are, through our comprehensive data system, beginning to get some insights into how the female peers in teenage boys' lives and how their teachers are observing the boys' attitudes, behaviours before a workshop, after a workshop. So that's something that we're actively investigating. But yeah, our predominant focus is on teenage boys in our context. And yeah, I could say a lot about how, I guess, outdated stereotypes of masculinity, which are very well outlined in the Jesuit Social Services Man Box research. We reference that all the time. So hello, Matt. yeah, I could speak a great deal about how those impact young relationships, but I think in the context of adolescence and what we're talking about today, the biggest difference that we see between the current generation and perhaps previous generations is just the rapid advancement of the online and the digital world. I'm 35 years old now. When I was in high school, I had a Nokia 3310, which could not access the internet, and I didn't have a device that could access the internet until I left school. So I feel like I was probably one of the last generations to grow up with a device that couldn't access the internet. And so I think there's a big gap in understanding between perhaps my generation and older generations, and the realities of what it's like to live in a world where all of these young people are connected through digital devices and have access to basically everything on the internet from such a young age. And I think there's still some research to be done in that area. And I think we saw in adolescence how the online world impacts young relationships, particularly around the use of emojis. I think that was in episode 2, and yeah, we see that playing out in the real world as well. The wilting rose emoji is currently one that's really being used by young people in an ironic way to reference something that is a bit outdated. And so it really is impacting their lives. But yeah, we also see that boys' capacity for care and empathy and respect come through really strongly in our workshops as well. So I do just want to say that it's not all doom and gloom. And when we give boys spaces, role models, tools to connect in an authentic way, there is a lot of hope out there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talk so much about, that young people are constantly connected, constantly online, and you always have that sort of ever-present pressure that, you have to present yourself in a certain way and your image is so important. But I think that's a really good point, that it's so much about young people, they just want to, do the right thing, and they want to flourish, and they want to, it comes from a place of care where this is happening. So I think that's a really good point. Thanks, Daniel. So I might throw to Simon now. So in the show Adolescence, as well as elsewhere, we hear all these terms like, incels, red pills, 4chan, all this stuff. So can you shed some light on that, Simon? What does all this mean? Like, what is the manosphere, effectively?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think one of the things that was interesting about Adolescence was that the manosphere actually only appears very marginally in the show, but it became the real focus of the discussion afterwards. And I think there's a lot of fear about the manosphere, and rightfully so, but there can be overblown as well. A little bit of, I think people talked about sort of panic around this community as well. But the manosphere is a collection of online blogs and social media forums, places online where men come together to talk about quote unquote men's interests. And generally that's a focus on talking about sex and relationships, talking about their experiences with them, talking about self-help, and talking about their lives in general. And there's a lot of deeply personal discussions on there about people talking about their lives. But this is all done through a very anti-feminist and often highly misogynistic lens. And the basic belief within these communities is that men's lives are that things are going wrong for men, that society has turned against men, and that feminism is to blame for that, that the feminism has gone too far, and in turn is destroying men's lives. And beyond that, that there are inherent differences, such inherent differences between men and women, that a lot of people in these communities end up believing that these differences are so strong that they create such misogynistic views, really highly misogynistic views. And there's 3 real communities within the manosphere that sort of all have these similar beliefs, but what they do is they think about how to respond to that in different kinds of ways. So I'll just go through those very briefly, but there's the seduction community. That's people like Andrew Tate is really strong within that community. That's people who teach each other. They have courses, programs, very expensive programs to teach men how to pick up women, to get relationships with women, and it's a system that they call game. And game is often men teaching highly manipulative tactics about how to pick up women, teaching things like no doesn't mean no, that you should continue pursuing someone even if they've said no, for example. So that's one group. There's incels, who people was mentioned in Adolescence and people may have heard of. That's involuntary celibates. It's people who believe that due to their physical traits or their personality that they're unable to obtain relationships with women, and then they often become very angry about that, and they have been engaged in physical violence. There's been some quite high-profile attacks from incels. And the final group is men going their own way, or MGTOW, and they're men often in their middle age who have have left generally bad relationships, or have had women leave them, and they believe that relationships with women are so dangerous and so bad for men that they should just avoid them altogether, and that men should, quote unquote, go their own way. So they're the different groups that exist within this community.
Oh, thank you. That's a really useful overview, because I think, and we saw it in Adolescence as well, there are all these different glimpses of these different communities, but I think it can be quite confusing when you just hear little bits and pieces here. So I think it's definitely worth acknowledging that this, while like misogyny may be the common theme, everyone's kind of approaching it from a bit of a different way in these different communities. So Heather, where are young people getting these messages and this content? You know, is it social media, or is it pornography? Is it gaming? Yeah, where is this all happening?
I think it's happening everywhere. And I think what Simon's just pointed out in the different groups, there's entry level aspects to it. And then I think, and there's been many studies done on this, and the power of the algorithm, the targeting of young men, the targeting of messaging, what seems as rather a curious look into the world, or a sense of, you know, the slope between Andrew Tate, and that further what we call rabbit hole messaging is once those algorithms get you, and you know, they do rate you by gender and age and target audience. I find that particularly the clients that we have and we talk to, is it becomes a very slippery slope. So what is you know, a very casual act of being on social media, or playing a game in a network of other people, can have that messaging there. So you can either actively seek it, or or in a little bit both ways, it can actively come and seeks you. So I think the messaging's everywhere, but I also think it's really, really important to point out it's just not online. There are a lot of people, what we've seen, especially with our clients, is there are negative male role models, misogynistic men that are using domestic and family violence in their relationships in real life, that's also modeling some of those unhealthy behaviors, and then they're being sort of accelerated online. So I think there's an element of real world behavior, and then there's online influences.
You're right. I think you're very right as well with the point about how there's, you know, you can deliberately look for it, or it can be shown to you. And I think we saw that in the show at one point. The dad mentioned that he was just looking up some, you know, gym instruction content, and then that then led him down that rabbit hole. And that's a bit of a common path, just looking at very innocent fitness content to begin with, can take you down that way. But that leads us on to our next question about sort of the drivers of this. So I want to throw to Matt and say, what is it that makes the manosphere appealing to young men?
Thank you, Alice, and yeah, firstly, thanks to you and NAPCAN for convening this conversation. I think it's a really really grateful to you for playing that role. I think inherent in that question, Alice, requires, you know, empathy, which in the context of this conversation can be pretty fraught, because given what Simon's touched on, there's some pretty extreme and harmful behaviours with really significant consequences for the victim of those behaviours. And so I just want to name up front that addressing a question like this is inherently tricky, and requires, I think, a degree of empathy, which at times is understandably not where people would want to go in the first instance. I also think that to address a question like that, it's sort of requires you to go to the human rather than go to necessarily the technical parts of this and the sort of the online parts of this. This is fundamentally what are the sort of needs, wants, desires that the types of behaviour that Simon and Heather and Daniel have touched on. What is it fulfilling? There's a few things that I think come out based on the research and also our practice experience. The one is the social rewards to this behaviour. This sense that somehow this behaviour is either funny or puts people in a position where they're somehow on top of other people. This sort of idea that to secure a spot in that alpha male group, you've got to be misogynistic, homophobic, classist. You've got to show up in ways that other. And inherent in that is, of course, power dynamics, that we know that these types of harms are gendered, and oftentimes people who identify as non-heterosexual are on the end of them as well. And so there's power dynamics in the sort of physical world that are accelerated, as Heather has highlighted, online. And I think the final thing is that sort of retaliatory impulse, this idea that somehow, and I'll focus on men, it's of course not exclusively, but somehow men are being left behind and they've got to find an outlet to blame. We've seen that in recent days across the country as it relates to the anti-immigration protests, that this sort of grievance politics where you are left in a position where to make yourself sort of reconcile the difficulties that you might be confronting, there's a need to blame and other and push down people who have less power. And so, yeah, I think there are a few of the things that stand out to me as what makes some of these environments appealing to young men, Alice.
That makes sense. That's a really good point about the empathy as well, that I think that's important in this conversation, that to acknowledge that we can work to understand and recognize what's driving this without necessarily condoning it, and to make that distinction important. And yeah, I think Heather made a good point about the sort of, the offline influence as well, from, the different masculinity figures someone might have in their life. I think it's really important as well. We know from the Australian Child Maltreatment Study that like 2/3 of Australians have experienced some form of child abuse or neglect. And so a lot of people are going to be having some of those similar influences in the home life. But I also just want to ask Daniel, do you also have a perspective on this? Why is the manosphere appealing?
Yeah, I do. Thank you. I echo a lot of what Matt had to share, so I won't repeat myself there. But I think what I notice is a lot of the appeal of some of the content that gets published by Manosphere figures is around success. There's the hustle and grind mindset. There's the entrepreneurship, and so what I see in that is that these external factors become quite attractive. So they might see a man like Andrew Tate, but there's plenty of others as well that have the body, they have the cars, they have the women, they have the money, and that's appealing. But what those things are external factors, and I think what the manosphere often misses is providing boys with the internal architecture to be able to support their own well-being. And so it raises a question for me around, what are we doing for teenage boys, for our young people, in order for them to look after their own well-being and become more aligned with how they feel about themselves on the inside, rather than chasing these external factors. And I really do believe that underlying all of these things is a strong desire for connection. And Matt touched on the anti-immigration protests, so we see that as well in the way that, for example, neo-Nazi groups groom young people, is they offer these lost or isolated young men with a sense of community, of connection, of brotherhood. And I am a firm believer that there's a way that we can address those needs without causing harm to anyone else. And so it raises the question for me around how are we doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. And Matt, just to kind of wrap us up for this section, can you tell us how is misogyny online different to violence and misogyny offline?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. I think I just might start by sharing just a couple of findings from our Manbox 2024 research, which is to say that misogyny offline is pretty prevalent. Just to give you a feel, this was a representative sample, 3,500 Australian men, and I'll focus here on, given that the orientation of this conversation towards younger men, what we found for 18 to 30-year-olds. And so we found that 35% of 18 to 30-year-old men believe that many women mistakenly interpret innocent remarks as being sexist. The same number said that many women don't appreciate all that men do for them. And then at the more, I guess, extreme end of things, 24% shared that many allegations of sexual assault made by women are false, and 20% shared that domestic violence is a private matter. And so I guess to start in the offline world, these are not sort of these misogynistic views. It's not to say that there's a small group, like that's quite a significant number of men who hold some of these perspectives. And I'd say that if you move then to the online world, that word that Heather touched on a moment ago, that accelerant that the online world provides, it allows an environment where you can be reinforced, your views can be reinforced in a sort of a community without challenge, in a way that I think you will be sanctioned, I think, in an offline world. And to Daniel's point, there may also be much greater opportunities for connection with people who don't hold these perspectives. In an online world, you can be pushed into sort of environments, whether gaming or social media or just viewing content, where your perspectives can just be reinforced over and over again. And so I think in those environments where you're able to connect with, inverted commas, like-minded people, things can become much darker much more quickly, and you start to push much more into the extreme end of things. And I think the nature of that challenge, and this goes a little bit to, I know where you'll take us, Alice, what can governments and educators be doing? I think there is a real need to increase our levels of transparency around what these algorithms are doing and how they're working and how they can be regulated. We wouldn't tolerate that in the offline world, this idea that you can be pushed harmful content without interruption or any accountability. And yet in the online world, there seems to be this sort of passive acceptance on the part of governments and by extension communities that is permissible. And so I think to understand that reality, that the online world is reinforcing these ideas with no accountability on the part of technology companies, aside from where that is illegal, I think that does need to inform where we go with regards to solutions on this.
Definitely. And yeah, hopefully we'll dive into some more of that in a little bit. And yeah, those are some really surprising statistics. I do really encourage people to go look at the Manbox research, because there's so many more fascinating statistics like that. It's a really great piece of research. So coming now to sort of the impacts that this misogyny actually has on people, now that we've sort of explained a bit what it's about and how it works. So I want to come first to Simon and ask, firstly, what impact does this misogyny have on how boys and young men view themselves?
Thanks. It's a really good question, and it's I think it's really hard to tell often in these communities how that's playing out unless you're working with people. But I think that working with people in depth. But if we're talking about how misogyny impacts how boys view themselves, I think that there's a twofold thing that's going on here. Much of this is based on a belief of a kind of superiority. Misogyny is based in a belief of the superiority of men, and in these kind of inherent differences that people believe that they exist between men and women, that can lead to this. And so it can, at the surface level, lead to men feeling those ideas. Often the manosphere is really sold on providing a clear answer to understand what's going on in men's lives, and a clear solutions to those problems. And so often it can provide a sense of false clarity, I would suggest, for people, for young people, not just young people, but for all people, about what's going on in the world. This is why people talk about taking the red pill. And the red pill is a term used in the manosphere quite a lot, which is based off the matrix, which is the belief that if you take the red pill, you get to understand the truth of the world. And taking the red pill in the manosphere is understanding the truth of the problems of feminism and the problems of our current society. So there's this sort of belief in this sense of clarity. But then, as I argue in my book, this is all what we call, it's a cruel belief. It's a sense of something that a solution, and then often a problem, a solution that is, and the solution is go and do more self-help, go and learn, pick up techniques, or go to the gym more. This is why often gym content ends up letting people down to these places. But those solutions don't actually give people real solutions. It doesn't give them a real outlet. And the communities aren't real communities. People are often, Matt mentioned, seeking social connection, but these communities aren't real communities, particularly the ones online. And so you have this sort of sense of the clarity that can come from the red pill, but then a sense of disappointment that can often follow, or an internal disappointment or an internal continued struggle to try and find more answers, because nothing works. And you do end up with men in the manosphere, for example, who end up with very nihilistic worldviews, that nothing will ever get better. Incels are based entirely on this idea of nihilism, that nothing will ever get better. And often that's where you see people going down the path of taking violent actions, whether it's committing mass attacks, or there's actually high levels of suicide rates and high levels of self-harm and mental health problems in these communities. And so it can lead, and that's often because the community provides a sense of false hope, that some things will get better if you participate, but they don't get better. And then the violence that follows is part of that. So it's a real mixed bag in terms of this, but I think that in the end, it's sort of a sense of clarity that can come, but then a long-term impacts, and then obviously we're not taking into account obviously the impacts of the relationships that how it can impact people's relationships with people outside of them. And often these communities are quite they encompass people to the point where you lose your connections with other folks outside who aren't participating in them, and that's very true for extremist groups in general. You lose that opportunity to have connections, and you become engrossed in this community only. And so you might lose your family connections, your connections with women in particular, connections with previous friends, etc. And that can obviously have other impacts.
Absolutely. And that ties us in really well straight into our next question for Daniel, which is, what is the impact that this online misogyny has on young relationships? So you have to expand a bit more on what Simon was just saying.
Yeah, absolutely. It has a severe impact, I think. It puts a very harmful, false agenda in the way of actual human connection. And I think what I've seen a lot is that it can take root at a young age, but it continues to play out for years. I mean, I saw just earlier this week, a dear female friend of mine, she shared a screenshot and a video on her Instagram of an interaction that she had with a man of my age, mid-30s, on a dating app. And she had a prompt on her dating app around, smashing the patriarchy. And she got a very angry and borderline abusive response from a man, just straight up. And so it continues to play out as some of these boys grow into adults. And so I think it also becomes a self-perpetuating cycle too. I guess the core belief inside some of those communities that Simon was referring to, particularly incels and that sort of thing, is that, I would say the core underneath all of that is, I'm fundamentally broken or unlovable, unworthy, And so I don't want to feel that, so I'm going to externalize that and say that that is women's fault, or that is the feminist agenda's fault. And so when they then enter into a relational space as a young person, and they go from that place of aggression, and then often find the girl or the woman rejects them because they're coming from a very negative place, and then they just go, see, I just got rejected again. See, I try and be myself, and I get rejected again, and so it becomes this kind of self-fulfilling negative cycle. And so, yeah, without intervention or without prevention tools that can work with young boys to address some of these harmful beliefs, or stop them before they start, or just give them tools and role models to be able to explore and express their internal world before they get influenced by these online figures. If we don't have preventative programs or interventions, then we're going to continue to see these harmful behaviours play out. And we know from the study that the Australian Institute of Family Studies did that a lot of girls, young women, have already experienced violence in intimate relationships before they've even hit the age of 18. So it's having a severe impact.
Yeah, I think that was a really good example of just how hard it is for someone to break out of that on their own without that external support, and just how much damage can be done in those relationships as that person keeps perpetuating these ideas. So thank you for that. So now, Simon, in Adolescence, we see the girls in the schools kind of repeating some of these same misogynistic talking points. It's not just entirely the boys doing it. So can you tell us a bit, like, what role do women play in this world? Like, are there female incels too? Like, how does that all work?
Yeah, absolutely there is. It's actually a little known fact that the incels as a group was initially created by a woman, although she didn't have the same misogynistic views. It was just a group that she wanted to create to help people get support for entering and talking to people in relationships. But we do see women who are heavily involved in these communities. And in fact, in Australia, the most prominent men's rights activist, I would suggest, is a woman, Bettina Arndt. And women are increasingly involved. And I think that it's worth noting that that's the case. There is research that does show that women are increasingly being involved in these communities, and often to a really extreme level. So in the US, in particular, there is a community called Tradwives. These are women who are increasingly becoming influential on social media, who believe that women should go back into what they consider to be traditional relationship structures, and that means that they should stay at home. Women who promote the idea that they should be subservient to men, to their husbands. Videos talking about how women shouldn't be leaving the house after dark without their husband. That they, lots of cooking videos, house making videos, all of these types of things. And those movements are often very much linked to white supremacy movements as well. So it's not only should women be at home, but there is a threat because of the belief of the threat of more immigration, that women should be at home to have more white babies to try and ensure that the white people continue dominance in the United States. So they're very much linked to a lot of these very racist ideas as well. So I think yes, women are heavily involved and increasingly involved, and I think that for me, what that points to that's really important to be thinking about is that we can't just be thinking about the structures of masculinity and how perceptions or what it means to be a man is not the only factor that's leading to this, because otherwise women would have no interest in these communities, because if it's just about what it means to be a man, they wouldn't be involved. And so there are other factors played out here. There are other factors in terms of people's material realities, what people are feeling really hit by modern society, by neoliberal society, and are looking back to the past with rose-coloured glasses, but a belief that that was better for people, both men and women. And I think there's some genuine complaints there about our current society. And the manosphere sells a really nice picture that our current society, across a whole range of things, not just gendered relationships, is problematic, and that going back to an old society was better for everybody, and that plays out really clearly. So we have to look at these broader factors as well. Looking at perceptions of what it means to be a man is important, but there are other things we really need to be discussing here, because people don't just exist in their gender. They exist across a whole range of different things, and the fact that women are so actively involved really points to this, points to the fact that there are different ways in and different appeals to these communities.
Yeah, such a fascinating point. Thank you. I feel like we could spend so much longer than diving into all the socioeconomic drivers of all this as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much to it. But just to ask you as well, Simon, just to also shed a bit more sort of like nuance onto this. So far we've been talking in a very sort of like binary way, talking about men wanting to get a girlfriend. But do we see this online misogyny also affecting young LGBTQIA plus relationships as well?
Yeah, so when in my research, I found less engagement from gay men in these communities, but it's very hard to tell because you don't often online, people don't talk about their sexuality necessarily in that kind of way. And one of the things that I always found ironic was you had all these people who were complaining about men who were complaining about women and complaining about relationships with women, but never countenanced the idea that you would then maybe entering relationships with men might be a solution to that problem. There's always kind of an attachment to these heterosexual relationships, which they then complain about bitterly. But that doesn't mean that there isn't misogynistic gay people, LGBTIQ people. And I think that we need to understand that misogyny isn't something that's occurring in a niche part of our society. It's not just this thing that's happening to this community over here. Misogyny is embedded in much of our social structures, much of our culture, much of everything that we exist in our society, and that influences all of us in different kinds of ways. And I think about TV shows that I watched growing up. The classic TV show that I think about now is How I Met Your Mother, which I watched growing up. Well, not so much growing up, in my early university years. And you look back on that now, and I find it highly misogynistic. But that was considered normal kind of mainstream culture at that point in time, and that has an influence over everybody. It has an influence over all of people. And so you do see amongst gay men, for example, often high levels of misogyny, a high level of a sense of actually we've got it better because we don't have to be in relationships with women, or the use of misogynistic terms and language and engagement. And so yes, that plays out, and that's just we've got to think about the fact that this is influencing all of us in different kinds of ways, and the manosphere is just an extreme end of what is dominant social and cultural ideas.
That's really interesting. Yeah, it's a new format, but it's not new ideas that we're
exactly
here. Yeah. Yeah, so thank you for all that, talking about sort of the impacts that all this has on young people and their relationships. So now, given that National Child Protection Week is all about turning conversations into action, I want to start talking about, given all this, what are the possible actions that everyone can take? So before we jump into hearing all of your lovely ideas, I want to first just talk about a couple of the solutions that are already out there being proposed. And I think the big one is the under 16 social media ban. We're just a couple months away now from it being implemented. And so I'm curious, what impact do you think that will have on online misogyny? Perhaps Simon first, if you want to talk about that.
Right. Sorry, mic was off. Yeah, such a good question on the social media ban. It's one that I get asked quite a lot in book events and things. It happens over and over again. And I think that I'm highly skeptical of the ban. I know of families with kids who have social media, and they're very, very concerned about social media. I know the impact of social media. I think the biggest risk of the ban is that kids are smart, and kids will get around these bans, and kids will figure out how to do that. And what it's doing is putting a band-aid over that problem. And what you're going to have is a situation where a kid, 12, 13, 14, is accessing social media. maybe accessing problematic content, or may end up in really dangerous situations, may end up in dangerous grooming situations, but they'll have no adult to talk to because they'll fear going to an adult to admit that they've broken the law to access this content. And so you're removing the incentive for both government, for schools, for parents to have serious conversations with their kids, to engage with their kids about what it means to be on social media, and to engage with their kids about the risks associated with that. And you're removing the incentive for kids to have chats with adults about it. And in fact, you're increasing the fear of doing so. And I fear that what's going to happen is you're going to have kids who end up in these spaces in kind of unregulated ways, in secret, which means that all of these kind of conversations we need to be having with kids just get lost. And that could be very, very dangerous. And I think that is a real worry about this ban.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think we saw in the UK with their recent age restrictions that they're putting in place, that then just the download rates for VPNs, which is the way that young people can get around these bans,
Yep.
they just surged immediately. So we know young people will find ways around it. So, yeah, but Daniel, you've actually heard quite a few opinions from young people. What are they telling you about this?
Yeah, we surveyed 4,200 teenage boys on this subject directly. Not surprisingly, the majority of them said that they would seek ways to get around the ban, echoing what Simon just said. But I think the interesting piece that came out of our data is that kind of subverts some narratives around teenage boys, is that 9 out of 10 teenage boys said that it's the responsibility of the social media platforms themselves and the tech giants to keep their platforms safe for young people. I think that there is a bit of an idea around there around young people that they're not critical thinkers, they're not kind of actively engaged in issues and the world around them. But yeah, 90% of boys told us that they believe that the responsibility should be on the social media giants to keep their platforms safe. And so, that just suggests to me that young people have the capacity to think about a social media ban quite deeply, potentially even more deeply than some people who make these sorts of policy decisions.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the other big solutions, well, a solution that's been proposed, as we mentioned earlier, is about showing adolescence in schools. That Anthony Albanese mentioned that at one point, that could be a good idea. Matt, what's your opinion on that? Should we be showing adolescence in high schools?
Thanks, Alice. I'll be brief on this because I know we've got a bit to get through on actions. In short, I don't think so. I think reality is that our experience working with teachers, and for that matter also parents, is that they are struggling with the confidence to implement the respectful relationships curriculum as it stands, let alone a dramatization. And so I think the risk there is that it opens up some pretty significant issues, including as it relates to things that are very live in young people's lives at the moment that are pretty difficult for schools to respond to without the appropriate support. So I do think one caveat I'd say, Alice, is that I would like to think we can get to a point where we can tolerate content like that and adults take responsibility for leading on content like that, but I just don't think that's our reality presently.
That's fair enough. Yeah, I think we know teachers are so overwhelmed already, and they just don't have the capacity to handle the sorts of conversations that would come from this. So if that's the case, Daniel, what else can educators do to help support their young people experiencing this online misogyny?
It's a great question, and I'd largely agree with Matt. I think asking them to show a 4-hour TV series and then hold a very nuanced conversation with young people is asking a great deal. I think for us, what would be a better use of time would be more investment in programs that can help young people explore their own emotional literacy and put words to how they're feeling about things. And doing that with people of all genders and building empathy across different backgrounds. I know that's probably getting a little bit more into what governments can do, but I think as well for educators, just being able to be healthy role models for young people, being authentic role models is something that is a little bit more accessible. And I've just got a quick example of that here. I facilitated a workshop last week with a group of teenage boys, and we had some fantastic educators in the room who showed up so authentically, and we also had myself and the co-facilitators just showing up authentically in the room and giving the boys access to a different version of masculinity. And we got them to write down on post-it notes at the end of the day, just a final reflection before they left the room. So I grabbed this one here because it really struck me, and it says, lots of men online tell us what a man should be. Today, you showed us what a man can be. And that was directed at the facilitators and also the educators who were in the room. And to me, that was just a perfect example of the power of curious, positive, empathetic role models.
Oh, that's such a sweet outcome to come from a program like that. Yes, I think there's a lot of really great programs out there between, the Man Caves programs in schools. NAPCAN also has our Lab Bites program, which recently has undergone a rewrite to focus a bit more on a lot of these online experiences for young people. Matt as well, the Jesuit Social Services, also runs programs in school. So yeah, what's your perspective on what educators could do?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Echo what Daniel has said. I'd also say that some of this is not rocket science. Like we want a world where, and I'll focus on our work with boys, where boys can get in touch with a trusted adult, regardless of how bad it gets for them, and not be seen as a bad person. Like we want them to be able to reach out for help, put most directly. As part of developing a national online early intervention service for young people worried about their sexual behaviours, we worked with the Royal Children's Hospital, the Gatehouse Centre, and interviewed all boys who were in therapeutic treatment for harmful sexual behaviours. And one boy, and I'll use a fake name, but just to give a sense, Leo, he'd been accessing mainstream pornography since the age of 8, had started to access child sexual abuse material. He was 13 when we spoke to him, and really had no one in his life that he could go to for help. There was tremendous shame, stigma. Eventually, Leo came to the attention of police. And so a bit of this is about creating relationships with young people, whether parents or other adults in their lives, where they can reach out for help and not feel like they're going to be shamed as a result. And so this is sort of this is, as I say, it's not rocket science in some respects, but it's maintaining dialogue with young people even when things get really shit, so that they know they can go somewhere and reach out for support. And the other thing I'd say, Alice, is, and Daniel touched on this a little while back, I think there needs to be much greater emphasis on the role of rejection and equipping boys with an understanding that over their journey, they're going to hear the words no, and engaging with them about that reality. What are they going to do in response when they, in any number of contexts, hear the words no, and building up a sense of, for want of a better term, resilience in response to that reality that they're not going to get everything they want in life.
Yeah, that's really, really important. I think especially just that compassionate curiosity to be able to, no matter, what they're talking about, even if we really are not comfortable, don't agree with it, to focus on understanding where that young person's coming from is the best way that you can offer that support to help break them out of these places. Heather, I haven't come to you in a while. So, if we've talked about the social media ban, but what else beyond that do you think governments can be doing to help with this world of online misogyny?
I think governments are doing a lot. I work with state and federal government, and it's often a topic that we are collectively talking about, and funding research and funding community grants and all to boost up this conversation and boost solutions such as the work that the Man Cave is doing. So I think we're already doing a lot. We can do more, and I think where we can really focus our attention and keep trying to keep social media giants or metas and the like to account, hold them to account. I think, if you look at any product, if you buy a car, there's a certain element of safety that you want with it. There's a certain amount of responsibility that manufacturer has. And you're providing a product, there's a lot of responsibility that goes with it. And I don't think that the social media industry is taking as much responsibility as other products that are delivered in Australia are taking. And I think government's really wrestling with that. I think it's big money and big infrastructure, and it's changing and evolving quicker than governments can respond to it. I think you would have seen with the whole, and I think eSafety does a marvellous job, but the whole takedown when there's been certain activities being streamed. I think what else governments can do, and what they are doing, is really tap in and listen to young people. When you look at government, they are, like myself, very middle-aged, very sort of not in terms of across what is happening to young people. And I think that whole thing of about, work with me with the solution, not talk about me. And I think that's really, really important. I think there's also elements such as, the federal government's just recently nationalised Step Together, which is obviously a program I'm deeply invested in, that provides that family support, community interventions, and that platform for people to be able to look at the issues that we're discussing today and other more sort of issues on that end of spectrum of violence, and be able to investigate what that means. I think people become more fearful and more avoidant the more they don't know about a subject matter. So I think the more that we socialise these conversations such as today, the more we talk about solutions and supporting young people, such as the panel has talked about today, is the more we can address the issue. I think demonising these subjects or villainising these subjects don't help the young men and the young people involved in it. And I think that's where government can put more focus, and as they are doing, on supporting the family. And I think when we talk about what else can governments do, governments can't be in your house. Governments don't parent. Governments don't aren't the social role model at the soccer game. They're not informing in terms of, they're not your peers that are the most influential in your life. They're not your father. And I think that's really important, that it's a community-based issue and not just a question on what is government doing about it.
Yeah, definitely. It comes from a lot of different, the more and more supports from those different places, the better and the stronger will be. And yeah, you talk about wanting to take that sort of, have a bit of control over how this tech operates rather than letting it just run free. And I think that ties really well into those surveys that Daniel's team have done with the young people who are saying they want that too. And so I think we saw it with the recent crisis in the early childhood sector, that when when a lot of people say we want change and there is that political will, government does respond. And so I think it's definitely up to that community response as well to put that pressure on the government. So that's one option, to pop some more regulation on the tech companies. But in the current situation where we might not have that as much, Simon, could you tell us a bit what else could tech companies themselves be doing? And is that different for social media or dating apps or gaming?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think there is lots of things tech companies could be doing, changing their algorithms, increasing moderation of hateful content. The algorithms in particular are quite dangerous and have been shown to be leading people into dark places very quickly. There's been a lot of research, for example, on YouTube's algorithms where you can start by looking at fitness material and then end up in extremes places very, very quickly. So there is plenty of things that can be done. I would, however, say that we shouldn't be relying on tech companies to do this for us, and pressure on tech companies is important, but the basis of tech companies and the basis of social media is to allow this content to flourish, and that is how they make their money. And so tech companies make money through attention. They want people on their social media platforms as much as possible, because that gets you views for advertising, and that's where they make all their money. And the way you get attention is you have new, diverse, and often extreme content, because it's the kinds of things that can make people angry, can make people engaged. And so you need to have algorithms that send people in lots of different directions, because that is how they keep people online. And so what we fundamentally need to do is to be rethinking what social media should be and what is the purpose of social media. And we cannot rely on big corporations that make billions of dollars out of this to do that for us, because they have no incentive to do it for us. And we've seen this very, very clearly since the election of Donald Trump. The re-election of Donald Trump, where big tech companies have given up on all of their moderation practices because there's no longer the political pressure to make it happen. And so they've become who they truly are. And you see this with Elon Musk, you see this with Mark Zuckerberg, with these people who have quickly lined up with Donald Trump and with the sort of quote unquote free speech approach. And that has resulted in a proliferation of this content online. So whilst tech companies could do more, I would not rely on tech companies doing more out of the goodness of their own hearts. We need to pressure them, or we need to legislate to change how these companies work and the kind of material that they allow to happen online.
Well said. We're running a little short on time, but Matt, do you want to quickly jump in on that point as well?
Yeah, thanks, Alice. Just to sort of come in behind Simon on that. So we are engaging with technology companies around using warning messages when someone seeks to access illegal material online. And our experience is that the role of the Safety Commission there has been massive in terms of pushing these companies to act. I'd also say, given the theme of Child Protection Week, from conversation to action, I agree with Heather. There's been a welcome increased focus with regards to online harm. I'd also say the pace, and I'm thinking here at a federal government level, the pace of some of this change and then moving from reviews and reports to action needs to speed up. There was the Online Safety Act review released in the October of 2024. There's been a commitment by the federal government to a digital duty of care, but no timeline associated with that. And in speaking with MPs, they, and one example, a Western Australian MP, getting a huge amount of correspondence on live exports, not a lot of correspondence on the Online Safety Act review. And so politicians will move where there's attention and energy, and I just think we're probably letting, and in this case again, the federal government off the hook around a pretty slow pace in response to that Online Safety Act review, which has got some pretty helpful stuff in it as relates to online, the online digital duty of care of some of these technology companies.
Yeah, that's a great addition to add things. And for anyone who's not familiar with the E-Safety Commission, I would really recommend just having a look. They do so much great work, so many great resources. They can support individuals who are having issues with tech facilitated abuse or whatever. So yeah, really have a look into them. So yeah, we're running short on time, but I'll just squeeze in one more question. And I'll start with Heather. What can parents and family members do? We'll have a lot of parents and family members here in the audience with us. What do you think they should know? Maybe you want to talk about the Step Together program too.
Yeah, I think what can parents and family members do is be involved. I think when I was having a chat with you, Alice, and that quote that you put up in the Adolescence at the end, he said he was in his room, wasn't he? He thought he was safe, didn't we? Didn't we think he was safe? What harm he could do in there? And I think really that whole line sums up the element of why we have National Step Together, because we've come across so many clients that when there is a police intervention, where there is a point of a disruption process and the police go through that door and they're looking for a 14, 15-year-old kid that has posted very significant threats and actions online, and the parents have no idea. And I think if you look at the Step Together website, we have very generous, a father who talks about his experience of when his son was noticed by law enforcement. And he says he was sitting next to me posting these things online and I had no idea. And I think that's really about talk to your children, be involved about what they're online. Don't let the child be in charge of technology in your house. Really about educate yourself, go on to eSafety. It has a million resources. And I think it's really telling Daniel's example there where he was getting the feedback from the child when all of this influence online about what it is to be a man. There's one session about, and I'm not downplaying it, but the influence of in real life practice. Like, I've seen all these people online, but you've shown me what it's like to be a man. And that's been in real life conversation. So I think it really is about, don't make it government and don't make it teachers' jobs to do all of this awareness, be involved, go on the Step Together website, use the different resources on this with the Man Cave and all of these different studies that Simon's doing and the work that Matt's doing, and educate yourself.
Fantastic. And we have the link to the Step Together resource in the chat there as well for anyone who's interested. And I might just finally finish off with Daniel. Could you also just say, what do you think parents and family members should know about what they can do to help support their young people dealing with all this misogyny out there?
Thank you. Yeah, I think, again, having, just curious, open conversations, I think, particularly in our context with young men, being able to, if we can, start some of these conversations from a place of curiosity, of non-judgment, of empathy, and really seeking to understand the young person's perspective before we go and share ours. Now, obviously, that can be very difficult at times with some of the attitudes that we've been talking about today. But I think what I have found time and time again in our workshops is that once we get underneath the kind of noise and the layer of, what in our context young men are, seeing and really enjoying online, and we're able to get to a conversation about, what are you enjoying about that content? What about that content appeals to you? And exploring, values. That those conversations start to become, really interesting and a little more deep. And I think there's also a great space as well for adults sharing stories of their lives and times that they've stuffed up, times that they've gotten things wrong, times that they potentially went down a rabbit hole that ended up no longer serving them. With the age, we have some wisdom that comes to us as well. And so being able to show young people that, we're not perfect, we're not infallible either. And in fact, we're on this lifelong journey with them is one way to be able to engage young people in this conversation that isn't going to get their backs up.
Oh, that's a really lovely way to finish. I think we just keep hearing that again and again, of just that empathy and that compassionate curiosity is so important for helping out young people who are, just trying to learn how the world works, and they're dealing with all this influence from all these, corporations trying to make money off them. So I think that's a really valuable way to put it. So we have a little bit of time now for questions from the audience. As much as I'd like to keep asking lots and lots of questions, I will hand it over a bit. We have so many great questions coming through. So I might just start asking these and just throw it out to anyone who might want to jump in and answer. So let me just bring these up and have a look. So the first one that we've got here is, how do we encourage parents to have these serious and important conversations around social media? Adolescents start the conversation between parents and young people, and at what age would you let your children watch Adolescence? Apologies if you can hear a dog in the background there. But yeah, so that's a bit similar to what we were just talking about. But yeah, how much could we, how could we help encourage those parents to have to just talk about the social media as well? And yeah, do you think children should be watching Adolescence? Simon?
I'll jump in very quickly. I think the main thing that I hear from a lot of parents, and I'm not a parent myself, so I can't talk to this experience, but the main thing I hear is a lot of fear about because they don't understand or they're not on these spaces themselves. And so I think it's giving people the tools to truly understand what these spaces are like. And there's a whole lot of work there. And I think that I'm always really skeptical when I hear about schools having to do this work. I think a lot more focus needs to be put on how do we encourage and work with parents, because actually parents are a much stronger influence on kids' lives than schools are. And schools are an easy way to do it because governments can intervene in schools, but schools are one part of kids' lives, but we should be doing a lot of work to give parents the tools to do this. And I think that we need to be investing in this. And again, going back to the social media ban, the problem with the social media ban is that it means the government has no incentive to do any of that work because, well, kids just aren't supposed to be online at this point in time. So why would we talk to parents about how they can work with their kids around this? And I think that's a real risk at the moment.
Great.
Alice, just sort of something I think to be hopeful about, which reinforces Simon's point. We'll be launching our adolescent man box research at the beginning of November, and one of the findings from that is that we asked adolescents aged between 14 to 18, where would you go if you needed help with something that's pretty tricky? And overwhelmingly, the most common response was parents, and so that included kind of a whole range of different options, including seeking help online. And so it's old-fashioned and it goes a bit to Heather's point, but parents still are fundamental to young people's lives. And so it's sort of, I think there's hope in that many young people, I think it was about 2/3 of young people said that they would go to their parents to seek advice. And there are resources out there, as Heather's pointed to, the Safety Commission's website to help support that. But yeah, parents are fundamental to this, I think.
Definitely. Yeah, and it comes back again to what we just say about every little conversation you can have has an impact. I think that's up here behind me. Every conversation matters. So we also had this question here: are prevention and early intervention strategies to promote positive masculinities and reduce toxic masculinity, are they more effective when delivered by men compared with women? I wonder if maybe Daniel,
I can jump in and speak a little bit to this. I think there is an element of when delivered by men, the boys in the room can identify with the people sharing their stories. I think that for me is why representation and diversity and inclusion are actually so important. When I facilitate workshops in areas of Victoria that have large migrant populations, for example, often I struggle to connect a little with those boys because I'm not from that background and they can't see themselves in me as much as they can with some of our other facilitators. However, what I'll also say is that we have female facilitators at the Man Cave, and we've had facilitators of different gender identities in the past as well. And I've seen incredibly powerful moments between teenage boys and female facilitators, teenage boys and gender diverse facilitators happen in rooms as well. So I do think there is a strong thing to be said for having men come in and work on these programs. And I also think that ties into, particularly the issue of gender-based violence. It shouldn't just be an issue for women to solve. It's an issue for all of us to solve. And I think when it comes to male violence, that's an issue that needs far more of men's voices in the space. And so programs that are delivered by men can play a role in that. And I've also seen really powerful things happen in rooms with programs that are delivered by people of all genders as well.
Great, that's a really sort of nuanced approach to that question. Thank you. There's just I reckon we can fit a couple more questions in. So I might ask this one because it ties into what you were saying before. Is there any research that examines the influence of people's cultural or ethnic background on their misogynistic views? Yeah. Is anyone familiar with any research like that? Because I can imagine it's very possible that it's an area that is just sort of not studied, not considered.
Well, yes and no. There is certainly research out there. I'm not as I don't have much strength in it, but just on the manosphere, for example, we know it's often spoken about as a white phenomenon or Western phenomenon, but it is actually very common in other countries, in non-white countries. Very high prominence of these ideas in places like India, South Korea, South America. So there is certainly differences amongst these communities, and there's different historical ideas of what it means to be a man, of what masculinity is, different historical things around colonization, for example, that all influence how that plays out. But this idea is prominent across a range of different cultures, and so there is certainly research into how masculinity exists in different ways across different places, and masculinity, sense of what it means to be a man, is different in different places. It's different across time, it's different across space, it's different across locations. So it's really important to think about those differences.
Absolutely. And just this final question I think we can do. In light of recent events in Victoria involving young men, how can they be supported in a recovery-oriented way when at times the adults in their lives might also be processing their own traumatic experiences? That's an interesting one. Does anyone have thoughts on that? So, because it's definitely true that it's difficult for people to help support someone else through their own trauma when they are still dealing with their own. And we know that that's, again, from the Australian Child Maltreatment Study, we know that that really, there's enough people out there with that history of trauma that can really just build on each other. So yeah, I'm not sure. Matt, do you have an idea?
Yeah, Alice, like the question is broad. And so I'll start by saying that I'm going to find a way into that, which, might be different if we were having a conversation with the person who asked the question. But yeah, I'd say in general that as it relates to support for victim survivors of violence and abuse, particularly children who have been victims of violence and abuse, I think we've just got a long way to go. I think there's increasingly positive rhetoric where a conversation that's been largely about violence against women is being recognised as, violence against women and children. And yet in Victoria, given that's where the question is focused in Victoria at the moment, there's still upwards of 5, 6, 7 months waiting lists to get into recovery services for young people who have experienced violence in the home. And so it's pretty basic stuff that if you are in need of a therapeutic response to something that's happened in your life, that service should be available in a way that's timely. And so it's really, in some respects, what gets prioritised. And I tell you what does get prioritised is when those same young people end up coming to the attention of the justice system. Not inevitably, but we know that young people who end up in the youth justice system have oftentimes been victims of violence and abuse for many years themselves, never received a response. And yet when they come to the attention of the justice system, it comes down pretty quick. And so there are instances where we're able to prioritise a response, and there are instances when we're not. And so I think that's a big part of it. What gets prioritised is pretty telling, and young people pick up on that also pretty quickly.
Yeah, and often those responses come sort of too little, too late, really. So Daniel, are you just going to throw in a point too?
Yeah, just quickly add a fantastic answer from Matt, and just wanted to share for people. This is covered really deeply in Jess Hill's fantastic quarterly essay from earlier in this year. So if people are really interested in a deep dive into the topic of how trauma impacts all of this, and the failures of some of our systems to support people, I'd highly recommend reading Jess Hill's quarterly essay from earlier this year, which covers it in great detail.
Thanks for that suggestion. Yeah, she does some incredible work. All right, well, thank you. That's all we have time for. There's more questions. I'm sorry to everyone whose question we didn't get around to for this. I wish we could keep talking forever. But if you are interested in discussing these things in more detail, a lot of this was a bit of just a scratching the surface. At the end of this webinar, you will be given a survey just about how you found it. So if you want to hear more on this topic, please pop that in the comments so we know that this is something that you might like to see us going into in more detail, because it's such an important and topical issue, and there's so much change going on in the world of online safety right now. So thank you to everyone who joined us for this conversation. Thank you to our amazing panel. I really loved listening and learning from all of you. So yeah, thanks for giving your time. I really appreciate it. And thanks for supporting National Child Protection Week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess I can just leave.